Yes. Welcome, everyone, to today's library event, hosted by, I think, 4 different groups. We have Women Are Real, a feminist-based organization in Northern California, focusing on women's rights. We have Pause, Californians United for Sex-Based Evidence in Law and Policy. And also DIAD, Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. Today's discussion will be on gender-affirming care, lies or life-saving. It's a public debate with speakers from diverse perspectives. We have Leila Jane, a detransitioner from California. We have Ari, who identifies as formerly trans, from Seattle, Washington. We have Alana, who identifies as an Indigenous person and identifies as trans. And also Exulansic, she identifies as an ex-trans from Northern California. Today's agenda.
Oh, let me go forward.
We will start with an overview of current gender-affirming care bans in the U.S., Puerto Rico, Europe, and the status of an FTC investigation with Kaiser, Stanford, Children's Hospital, and LA. And then we will have each of our panelists share their experience with gender-affirming care, how it affected them. And after that, we will have an open discussion with question and answer for the panelists with the audience. And each question will have we will have an opportunity for the pro and the con. So we will have each side represented. And then after that, we will have closing remarks. So hopefully we'll have a friendly, spirited debate today with everyone remaining calm. I know this is a very controversial topic and people get emotional, but hopefully we can all keep our emotions in check and have a great conversation today. So thank you again for coming. And let's
Hi, my name is Beth Bourne, and I live in Davis, California, and my family was impacted by gender ideology. And so I speak as a concerned mom. I was a lifelong Democrat. But I just want to thank everyone who's listening either on the live stream or who's in this room, and our incredibly courageous 4 speakers that are here, because we just need to have a conversation about this. You know, I was going to put up here the number of states right now in the United States that do not allow children to undergo surgeries or hormones. It's over half of the U.S. Progressive countries in Europe have halted gender-affirming care for minors, including the UK and France and Norway and Finland. I'm probably missing a few. In California, just in the last several weeks, we've seen hospitals like Stanford University's hospital, the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, Kaiser Permanente, which is the largest HMO in California, have all banned surgeries. At Kaiser Permanente, it's for 19 and under. Stanford and Children's Hospital, it's for 18 and under. Stanford and Children's Hospital have also banned hormones and the blockers, but Kaiser is still going forward with these drugs. Just a few weeks ago, back in July, I was one of the speakers, as well as Leila Jane, at the Federal Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. And, you know, the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, and the Federal Trade Commission are right now undergoing an investigation on gender-affirming care for children. And there's a portal if parents have experienced their child undergoing distress and being offered these drugs. You can kind of share your information there. And I just want to spend 2 more minutes just because this is why I speak out in front of the schools. And, you know, people see me as a terrorist, and that doesn't make sense, right? You know, one of the things about this ideology is it's impacting girls in sports. And, you know, you can see in this photo, you probably can't see it online, but it's a picture of a boy who was winning the state championship in high jump, long jump, and triple jump back in May. And so we're telling girls that, you know, it's okay for boys to be in your sports and in your private spaces. And we have to ask, why are we allowing this? If we're California and we're progressive, what about girls and women's rights? And then just lastly, you know, here at this library, if you go onto their catalog, this is Yolo County Davis Library, you can look up how many children's books are here on the topic of transgenderism, or, you know, being transgender. There's over 58 books, 250 in this library in total. The 58 picture books about being trans, and the books are like, you know, the pronoun book. So children, this is a picture book for 2 to 4-year-olds, right? Learn your pronouns. Gender identity for kids. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of more books back there. The schools are teaching it in health and science class and surveys, gender neutral bathrooms. The list goes on. But we're here today to talk about the medicine side of this, and this is the part that I think everyone should really be open to listening to this perspective these people have. So thank you for being here, and I'll let Judy, do you want to take over and introduce our first speaker?
Sure. Oh, with their live?
Oh, you know, you could just,
Their name. They're open to the first.
yes, Layla first.
Leila Jane is our first speaker. Come on up, Leila.
There's a little up there. You want to read that?
Do you want to read it or do you want me to read it? Leila Jane is a courageous young woman who detransitioned. She was denied justice by Kaiser Permanente's unethical arbitration clause after undergoing a double mastectomy at age 13. She now advocates fiercely for detrans individuals working to protect children from similar harm. Her fight exposes the urgent need for reform and medical practices affecting vulnerable youth. Thank you, Layla, for coming.
Thank you guys for turning out, by the way, today. So I'm someone who was fast-tracked down the medical pipeline from a really early age. I came from a background of pre-existing comorbid mental illness, such as depression and anxiety, as well as sexual abuse trauma from my childhood. It especially became really complicated when I started to hit puberty, and I hit it kind of young. Younger than all the other girls my age, so I especially felt other than compared to my peers. I went through a lot of distress and issues coping with the changes in my body, and I learned about transgenderism online. And the more I learned about it, the more I latched onto it for an easy reason for my distress. I was having behavioral issues in school around that age, 11, and began seeing therapy at Kaiser. And this initial therapist was really affirming, didn't ask why I was feeling the way I did, didn't do a formal assessment for any other underlying issues and thorough diagnostic process. She began to write out referrals for other gender clinics in the area and specialists that could begin medicating me. By 12 years old, I was starting Lupron, and mind you, I was in middle school experiencing hot flashes. It made it really hard to focus on my homework at the time. These hot flashes were so intense, I would go stand in my freezer. It's really horrible to have to bear. You know, now today I'm barely 21, and I live with hip pain and joint pain every day, which I suspect is from the Lupron. So I took the Lupron in November of 2016. By June of 2017, I had started on testosterone, mind you, I'm still 12, and began around that time having a consult for what they call top surgery, which is in reality an elective bilateral double mastectomy, radical. During that consultation for top surgery, you know, it was described in watered down terms. I was told I would never be able to chest feed. Of course, being 12 years old at the time of this consult, I didn't understand the significance of this and what implications it may have later on in life. As well as, you know, a 12-year-old isn't going to consider the fertility implications of leucron and testosterone or whatever cross-sex hormone is applicable in their case. I was told by my surgeon I might lose sensation, but I thought that equated to numbness. But every day I have a lot of nerve pain in the area. I can scratch until it bleeds because the skin overlying is numb, but the nerves underneath are severed and erratic. Also, to circle back with the chest feeding thing, I assumed that meant that my mammary glands would be removed entirely. But they're still there, they're just severed. So if I were to get pregnant and conceive a child and begin to lactate, it wouldn't have any way to get out, it would be trapped. As you can probably tell, you know, my voice is deepened from the testosterone, and I have a very slight Adam's apple that can only be removed with a tracheal shave. So that's kind of the gist of my story. I guess I'll go towards where I started to detransition. I began to detransition at 17 or so. I was scared to go back to the doctors that I was previously seeing. I didn't even know detransition was a thing, so I didn't know what to tell them. But I began to taper myself off testosterone. Shortly after I turned 18, I started my lawsuit. And it was a long 2 years. I was forced to binding arbitration based off a contract that my parents signed while I was still an infant when they initially got Kaiser coverage. So because of that, I didn't have an option for a jury trial. I had no choice. And my arbitrator ruled against me and dismissed my case based off statute of limitations, which is 3 years for medical malpractice in the state. So I would have needed to sue at 16, but mind you, I couldn't have even signed a legal contract, let alone I hadn't detransitioned yet. So that's kind of the overview of my story. I don't know if you want to take over here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Layla. We will have an opportunity at the end to have, if you have any questions for our speakers today. Our next speaker is Ari. Ari was once a left-wing political operative who referred to himself as a transsexual woman. After realizing that he had been improperly treated for childhood abuse trauma, he came to accept himself as a medicalized, gender non-conforming gay man. He now speaks and writes honestly about gender issues in defense of people who are vulnerable to being taken in by this ideology. I'm so glad he's here today.
It's a little weird to be doing this in the Blanchard room. Hi, I'm Ari. I lived about half my life as a transsexual. I was a traumatized gay boy. I grew up a very rough life. I had a lot of CSA. I had a lot of mental torture. I was really, really brutalized as a kid before the age of 12. When I got free of that, I had a lot of mental health struggles. I signed myself into a residential treatment facility at 15 years old and was diagnosed with complex PTSD. About a year and a half that took in a hospital every day, living there. I got out at 16 and a half, and within about 6 or 7 months, I was on my own. I had massive body issues. I had ego issues. I had confidence issues. I didn't want to go out to the world and face being a man. I didn't want to go out to the world and face a lifetime of the bullying I got during school. I was working as the chipper front desk boy at an Access AIDS clinic. I was checking people in to go see their doctors. And they had therapy next door, free therapy. They had a support group. And I thought, I need to get this figured out. I came from a military family. It was very conservative. I was raised religiously. And I thought it was my duty to join the military, like as the firstborn. Every generation in my family, the firstborn to serve. And I wanted to do that. So I thought I'd get help first, work it out, 18 and sign up and join the military. And so I walked into that LGBT center and asked them, did CSA make me gay? Did CSA cause me to like men the way I do? And did CSA give me these body issues? And what they gave me was a framework of gender identity, for what was wrong with my body over trauma and childhood sexual assault. I took that framework and I believed the doctors. And I believed that all of the suicidal tendencies I had throughout my life, all of the struggles with my body issues, the reason I couldn't fit in with other kids, it all came down to gender. And if I just transitioned, it would get better. And I lived my life based on that lie for about 15 years. Medicalized all the way, removed my genitals, ripped my face off and reconstructed it. Got married, fell in love with a man. It was at the height of my life when the trans community actually canceled me over the funniest thing. This thing of Blair White was funny. Now I'm kind of to the right of Blair White, so it's kind of funny that I was canceled just for thinking he was funny a couple years ago. But I went out there and I started asking questions that I had never asked before. I started learning about what trans really was. I started listening to people and listening to other perspectives. And somewhere along the line, I realized I had been lied to. I realized that most of those old men in that support group were obvious autogynephiles. They were old men who had wives and children. They'd been in the military. They transitioned at 35, 45 years old. They all mirrored my trauma and told me that they felt like I did when I was a kid. And I was so lucky to be able to do this now. And I went back and I looked at my life at 33 years old and realized it was all a lie. That they hadn't looked for the why behind gender dysphoria. They had just diagnosed the gender dysphoria. They had diagnosed a symptom, a collection of symptoms, but not why I had those symptoms. And now I know why I had those symptoms. I had those symptoms because I tied my body responding to being with a man to sexual trauma. I had literal nails in the chalkboard trauma, feeling my body react when I was with a man. And they told me that that feeling was because I was a woman trapped in a man's body. And now I'm a gay man trapped in a transsexual's body. There's no recovering my body. There's no moving forward. There is no real detransition. I'm a gay man married to a man who loves me. And he loves me with the body that I have. What do I have if I don't have that? I can't recover my genitals. I can't date gay men now. I am a gay man trapped in a transsexual's body until the day I die. Because they didn't look for the why. And they lied to me. I trusted the doctors, and they lied to me. That's all that really helps.
Thank you, Ari. Our next speaker is TT Exulansic. She's a ex-trans, re-identified woman with a BA in Gender and Women's Studies and Linguistics and an MA in Education, Speech Language Pathology. After spending over a decade in what she calls the Church of Trans, Exulansic, as she's often called online, lost her faith in her gendered soul, took off her binder, discontinued estrogen suppression, and began dedicating her time to documenting the harms being perpetrated in the name of gender using self-published first-person transition narratives on social media and creating a taxonomy, if I said that right, of the different schools of thought concerning the purpose of transition and the nature of so-called gender identity. Thank you, Exulansic, for coming.
Hi, nice to be here. It was interesting to get the little gauntlet outside. Glad that everyone made it safe for the most part. Can you hear me okay? Yes. And so my name, I go by Exulansic online. Real name is Sierra Weir. It's pretty well known now, so don't worry about protecting that privacy. I got into trans in college because I experienced a sexual assault, and that led me to want to take a feminist class to put what I experienced in context. And through that class, I ended up getting exposed to gender ideology and then declaring that as my major, because I still felt like that teacher was the only one who really could put what I experienced into context. So I wanted to pursue that, be more like her. And so I continued taking those courses and was exposed, especially in one of the upper division classes, to Judith Butler. And then the class, which is called Advanced Feminist Theory, by the way, but I don't think Judith Butler's a feminist. I call her a feminist. She's a them. And so that course got me to reflecting on my whole life experience, and I had peers, obviously, in that same class who were reflecting on their whole life experiences. And what do you know? We both realized that we had certain special gender gremlin in our hearts all along, and that if only people had acknowledged the gender gremlin, we wouldn't have suffered the way that we had supposedly suffered. So, and I did suffer in my life. I had a lot of difficulty, and I won't bore you with too many of the details, but I had a lot of trauma growing up, and so I was in a very dark, sad place at the time I was exposed to all this. And so it's very much like, this is your salvation. This is the way that you can get out of all of this pain. This is a way that you can exert control over your life. This is a way you can control your body, because I was still a young person. I was in my early 20s. And I was also still growing at the time. And so I went to my physician and I put forth these ideas, and he agreed to try to help me using, among other things, the WCAS standards of care, which advises something called gender-affirming menstrual suppression. So he kind of made up his own protocol. He prescribed multiple things that are used independently at lower doses as birth control, but in my case, it was combined specifically to maximize the side effects. And that's what happened. So as a result of that protocol, my joints were injured along the growth plate. And so essentially what happened is that without estrogen, if your growth plates are still open, which sometimes they are, and even into the 20s, especially in the hip and the clavicle and a couple others, that growth plate was held open by the lack of estrogen and by one of the medications being really good at pulling minerals out of it. And so the growth plates mineralize because calcium is laid down into cartilage, slowly converting it to bone. And before then, it can slip relative to itself. And so as a result of that, and the fact that these medications were keeping them artificially open longer than they should have been, and then on top of that, the doctors tell you to go to the gym and do weight-bearing exercise to prevent the bone loss that they expect the medications to cause. That's not a good idea if your growth plates are still open, to load the joint repetitively. It's just not a good idea. So what happened is that I developed a problem that is typically seen in men. It's much more common in men, especially high-level athletic men. So it's a developmental problem where in response to an unstable growth plate that keeps being loaded, bone forms around the growth plate, and that resulted in a problem with the head of my femur that then was not addressed because my doctor was incompetent, didn't know what he was doing, even though I brought it up to him, and I brought it up many, many times. And it wasn't until it had severely degenerated the soft tissue around it that they finally, in the last few months, even acknowledged that, oh yeah, your bone's the wrong shape. Oops. Yeah, it was caused at the end of your adolescence, right before adulthood, right when you were taking those drugs, right when the pain started. Great. So that's where I'm at. I'm waiting on surgery to try to fix one of them, but I don't know how many other things that's affected. Like Layla, I'm in a lot of pain and have been for quite a while since I was on these medications. Anyway, and so I got my degree. I was trying to live with this. I was becoming progressively more disabled. over the years. And then eventually I just got to the point where I didn't believe in it anymore. I'd taken a lot or gotten a lot of therapy, and I had really started to realize that my distress, my social skills issues, my difficulty with my own reflection, my sense of being out of place and alien and not belonging anywhere, that all that did relate back to childhood trauma, especially like my parents' divorce, for instance. And all of that is was just never addressed and never considered because of this ideology of gender gremlin infestation being the real cause of your distress. And that's something where they will attribute basically any other problem and suggest the ideology says that if you can just get rid of the gender dysphoria, everything else is going to resolve and improve, whether that's eating disorders, whether that's depression, and whether that's any number of other problems. And so people who get put on the gender disassembly line are not getting a thorough workup, because if you present with gender issues, that's like, you've got feelings cancer, we gotta hurry. What if it metastasizes? Which is exactly what it does, by the way, because there's so many videos on TikTok of girls saying, I got my chest cut off, but suddenly I have hip dysphoria now. Suddenly I really want to get that phallus sewed onto my garage. Suddenly I really can't stand some other body part, because they have not been helped to see that there is a pattern. They have not been helped to develop the metacognitive awareness, the awareness of self and your own internal processes, to recognize why you are so distressed, and the fact that there's a pattern to your distress, and the fact that you're fixating on a body part and trying to find the external cause so that you don't have to feel the pain of what you went through. And that's it's criminal that they're doing this to kids, especially, who by their own nature do not have metacognitive awareness because they're kids. And they're especially targeting autistic kids who by their nature, by our nature, do not have the metacognitive skills that are at the age level that they expect, which is why they have such a difficult time, because socially they're functioning at a lower age. And that's being manipulated and taken advantage of by this industry, which is preying on people's ignorance, piggybacking on the general attitude that if you're taking something for birth control, for example, that it can't be causing other problems. Which I don't understand how that's the thing, that we have this attitude, how women get so gaslit when they report side effects of these hormones. But the idea is that when they know that you're fine, that they're giving you drugs to a healthy person, they don't consider that the drugs are going to cause a problem, which obviously makes no sense, but that seems to be the zeitgeist. So once you're on the hormones, they're never going to question that. They're never going to think, you know what, all these other problems you developed since the hormones, maybe it has something to do with those hormones, which are acting on the brain, which is another thing they don't really explain. So you've been labeled as gender dysphoric, you've been labeled as terminally mentally ill, and you've been constructed as someone for whom any level of deterioration and pain and difficulty and disability is fine, because it's to save your life, because you were such a high risk to yourself. And so we're gonna save your life by maiming you, by suppressing your brain function, and no, anything you do after that point, any problem you develop is going to be blamed on you, and you're going to get to internalize that and to think, I am so screwed up. I have this list of problems, like 12, 13, 14, 15 diagnoses now. And then you go off the hormones and it's just like, I don't seem to have attention problems anymore. I don't seem to be so depressed. I don't seem to be so anxious. Where did my panic disorder go? And so it's just, yeah. Whether you are ready to let go of the ideology, if you are a trans person watching this and you've been on hormones a long time and you've developed things since you started hormones that you think are due to you and your flawed brain, consider talking to your doctor, because you might not understand truly exactly how these drugs work and what implications there might be to the drugs that you're taking. All right, that's all.
Thank you, Exulansic. Our last panelist is Alana. Alana has been challenged by Alana's gender identity Alana's whole life. Alana did not feel congruent with how society told Alana how Alana should be in Alana's body, because Alana was born with a penis. Alana has felt a lot of pressure to conform to society's definition of being a woman through gender reassignment surgery. However, through Alana's Indigenous cultural studies, Alana has found a different model for understanding gender as a spiritual journey, which helped Alana accept Alana's unique body without the need to surgically alter it. Alana asks the medical industry to be more open-minded to alternative ways for offering gender-affirming care, which may help people discover themselves without permanent surgical alterations. And I would like to add that Alana is very brave for coming today, speaking with this audience and with these panelists with a differing view on gender. I really appreciate you coming. Let's welcome Alana.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. This is the portion where we get 20 minutes.
Sure, we're ahead of schedule.
We're ahead of schedule. Great. I just wanted to make sure. So I wrote a few notes to myself. I wanted to create a PowerPoint presentation, but I didn't have time. So it would be nice to have slides, but I don't have them. I feel slightly unprepared.
Yeah, can you turn the mic up again? Or did the battery die?
Hello?
I'll go grab another one.
Testing, testing.
Thank you. I feel slightly unprepared to speak to this audience in particular, but I also decided that I was going to go ahead and do it. And I wanted to start by talking about stories. Indigenous cultures often share their worldview through story as a narrative. And
Maybe the battery is going out. I'll get the other one.
You have new batteries?
We're gonna go grab some from the librarian.
it's okay, we have 20 minutes.
Did you want to get a water or something?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, why don't you
Yeah.
relax while we take care of this?
Yep. And we might be able,
Technical
yeah.
difficulties.
And I'm not sure if we still have some good enough audio just from my phone that's recording, so,
Okay.
um,
I have a wireless mic if you want to connect that to the,
yeah, that could work too, or,
I mean, it's not going to amplify it here, but it would improve the audio quality on the recording.
Well, we definitely should have Alana amplified.
yeah. Why don't we could take it, does anyone have a clarifying question, or, I could let everybody know we have water in the back. I think we've got several hundred people on the live stream, and I can't offer you water, but, we're just glad you guys are online. Yeah, we'll get the batteries going here in a second. And we do have some music out front. Yeah, we're grabbing batteries for this call.
It's mostly left.
Yeah. And the batteries are coming in.
Body's burning. No more war pigs have the power. And of God struck the hour. Day of judgment, God is calling. On the war pigs calling. Begging mercies for the sinners. Faith by faith. Oh, Lord, yeah. That sounds like a different song. Oh, sorry.
Excellent, all right, thank you. Let's get the pre-show.
Keep Davis is for everyone.
Can you read?
Yeah, thank you for coming. You guys should be in the room listening to our speakers today.
All right, I'm ready to party.
Okay.
You?
Yeah, ready and speaking Davis.
Since the pandemic, I was like the pandemic.
Beth, are you ready?
Yeah, sorry.
Let's all
We
take
just
our seats.
intermission.
And let Alana have the floor with Alana's presentation.
Thank you. I'm back. So yeah, I was talking about stories, and so I'm going to share not only my story today, I'm going to share other people's stories that have profoundly impacted my own sense of self. And I also want to be very grateful to hear everyone else's stories that I have shared today. And in the framework of storytelling, what I want to also communicate is that hopefully by the end of my time up here, I will have impressed a certain point, and that is we're all on a gender story. Every single one of us has our own unique gender story. And it starts when we're young. No one knows, we know what, however we were born, we don't know how we're going to be a man or a woman or a non-binary person or however we choose to tell our story over time. And so honoring people's stories, I think, is a very powerful thing to do, regardless of what that story is. So that's why I came here today, to honor my story, but also to honor everyone else's stories. And so I wanted to start with a story of when I was in kindergarten, and the teacher, she wanted to teach us how to write our name. And at that point, I had been raised with my middle name, which was Alan at the time. However, she introduced me with this weird, different name, Richard. And I'm like, what is this name? She's like, well, that's actually your name, your legal name. And I realized at that point that my parents had been calling me by my middle name because my father's name was also Richard. Just made it a little easier for the family. But I was 5, I didn't keep track of those things. I just knew that writing the name Richard seemed like such a chore compared to writing the name Alan, right? And so she puts the, everyone has their pencil. And she's like, okay, well, we're going to figure out right now who is left-handed and who is right-handed. And so she's like, all you have to do is, feel it out for yourself. So I'm there trying to figure out whether I'm left-handed or right-handed, and I'm realizing another big, big thing in my life. In this very moment, I have no idea whether I'm left-handed or right-handed. Plus, I also have to write this really long name that I don't even identify myself with, right? So I'm kind of getting frustrated. I'm trying to not do the exercise or the activity because I'm just like, why? None of these questions are answered. And so she comes to me, she sees me be upset. She thinks I'm upset because I can't tell the difference between left and right or whatever. So she's like, why don't you just do your right hand? Because most people are right-handed. So you're probably right-handed. Okay, so I'm like, okay, that seems like a tentatively good solution for the situation. So I start writing with my right hand. I go home, and my father asks me, what did you do at school today? And I say, well, we started learning how to write our name. And I discovered that I'm actually Richard. And he's like, oh, yes. And he told me why they made a decision to call me Alan. So I realized there are bigger players at play. There's bigger conversations happening that me as a 5-year-old are not, no one asked me or told me about this situation. So I'm learning about myself in terms of how other people had already decided I was supposed to be, or named, or whatever, right? And so I also told him that the teacher told me that I should write with my right hand. And what I wasn't expecting was him to freak out about that. He got so upset about this. And I'm just like, well, what's going on? He's like, well, you're most likely left-handed because I'm left-handed and that's passed down. So you're most likely left-handed, he told me. And the fact that she didn't let you explore who you are is really upsetting to me. So here I am, 5 years old, realizing that I have this new name and also realizing that I still don't know which hand to use to write with, right? And so I decided from that point forward, I was gonna write with both hands somehow. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do both hands. And then maybe one day I'll figure it out. And so over time, I did. And I learned how to write with both hands. But over time, it just became more and more comfortable to consistently write with my left hand. And so at some point, because it just became impractical to write with both hands all the time, I decided to be left-handed. I never told my dad that, but I'm sure he would have been happy that I ended up choosing that. Now, that was a story about my hands, but I have another story about my hands as well. There was a time after school, I was waiting to get picked up, and there was a cute boy also waiting to get picked up, and he was sad because his parents were late, or I don't know why he was sad, but I was like, you know what? I have compassion for this sad boy. So I went to sit next to him, and I went to hold his hand. And he seemed to be comforted by that, and I enjoy comforting boys. So that's when I first learned that I enjoyed doing that. And then my dad came to pick me up and saw me holding hands with this boy. And he went into a rage once again about my hands. This time it's because I was holding hands with a boy. And he didn't get angry at me, and he didn't get angry at the boy. He got angry at all the teachers in the school that were there watching this terrible thing happen and allowing this thing to happen in front of, like acknowledge or like permitting it to happen instead of, I don't know what they were supposed to do to prevent, this from happening. And so, once again, kindergarten me, I keep getting my hands in the wrong places, or just, my hands just don't seem to understand what to do properly. And at that point, I decided that it's not safe for me to hold hands with boys because it didn't feel safe at the time. I didn't want to get the teachers in trouble. I didn't want to get the boys in trouble, and I didn't want to make my dad angry because he was a very scary man when I was little. And that also started this journey of disassociation for myself in terms of who I am in relation to the feelings of attraction that I have to other people, who happen to be mostly boys. And from that point forward, I decided that it wasn't safe for me to explore my sexual preferences or my attraction preferences. I was only 5. There wasn't a sexual desire there, I don't think, but something deeper, a bond or an affinity to something other than me, which I was becoming aware of at the time. And so what I decided to do was to just forget any sort of possibility for intimate connection with that sense of attraction until I went to college. And then I finally, after years and years of depression, I became suicidally depressed at 13 because I just didn't have the intimacy I wanted in my life. I didn't have the romance, the friendships. I couldn't get close to boys, even if they were friends, because I was afraid that I might get, attracted to them. And I also didn't get to really explore who I was or discover my sense of self. Wait until later in my 20s. Okay, so that's one story. So I'm gonna end my story there, and I'll pick that back up in a moment. I want to share the story of David Reamer, who I learned about a few years ago. And David Reamer, he was born a twin to his brother, and he during their I don't know whether it's official, during the circumcision, there was a medical mistake where the tool used to circumcise was overcharged or something. I guess they zap it, I don't know, and they ended up clipping off his penis. So the doctor brings the mother in, says, okay, we've made this mistake. Your son's penis is gone. But there is a psychologist who is very, very prominent in this field, and he believes that you can actually raise people to be any gender. He has this theory of the fact that he believes that gender is something that can be raised. It's a raised thing versus a biological thing. And so they decided to raise him as a girl. And what they did was they practiced the surgeries that they practiced for intersex people, which I'll talk about later. And they surgically gave him a vagina. As you know, when he was young, and going forward, and they told the mother that he can never know the truth, that this happened to him. He must always be told that he is a girl. And so then, of course, he was just a little boy trying to figure out what that meant for him. Until he turned 13, and he was then sent to the doctor to start getting estrogen injections because he had to continue becoming a woman as he was destined to be by the psychologist that was working with that family. Since he couldn't naturally produce estrogen, he had to then start getting injections, and he started asking questions at that point. He's like, I don't think I want these things. I don't know why I'm getting injections. And the answer is, well, you're a woman, and a woman naturally develops breasts. And if you want to have a happy marriage with your future husband, you're going to want them. And then he started saying that he didn't feel like a woman. He's like, I don't think that feels right to me. I don't think I want it. And as soon as he declared for himself that he did not feel like a woman, his father at that point knew that they had made a mistake, that they couldn't try to keep convincing him that he was a girl when they knew the truth, and so they ended up telling the truth. And that truth shocked him for life, and he ended up detransitioning at that point because he had forced transition. We can call it a forced transition at an early age, and he tried to do whatever he could to become a man under his conditions. He ended up committing suicide later in his life, but he did end up marrying a woman and having adopting some kids, and so he tried to live whatever respectful life he could live at that point before he committed suicide. So now, the story of David Reamer is really important because while he was growing up, the psychologist that was in charge of the family became very famous in publishing all these papers about how he had discovered a way of treating people that had sexual abnormalities born at birth. In this case, his condition wasn't a genetic abnormality, it was just an accident, medical accident. But his story became the primary case study for how people of intersex, people that are, and intersex means that children born with variations of sexual anatomy, okay? So 1 in 5,000 births are intersex, meaning that they are born with some form of genitalia that does not look like either a penis or a vagina. And there's many reasons why this happens. It's fairly rare, and usually it's caught immediately and corrected surgically. As soon as the baby is born, if they can't identify the genitalia as one or the other, they surgically alter it to make it look at whatever it is approximately supposed to look like. One of the cases that I want to focus on is XY, people born with XY chromosomes that have androgen sensitivity. So that means that they have XY chromosomes, but for whatever reason, they can't receive testosterone. They don't respond to it. And so they're born with a vagina. But they also usually have gonads, they have testicles, but they're internalized testicles. And so the vagina is typically opened. They're given like this dilator thing so that the vagina stays open for them, and their testicles are removed, and they're told that they are women. Okay. Now, in some cases, the surgery doesn't happen until they're a bit older, until they're like 13 or whatever. There's different ways of managing these cases. Oftentimes, the parents are included in talking about how to handle their children, and many times the parents aren't even consulted. Okay, so many of these individuals that have androgen sensitivity they're raised as women. They're told they're women their whole lives, right? They're told they're girls. At some point, they decide that they feel like they're men. And then once they say, okay, I feel like I'm a man, they discover that they actually were born with testicles. They were internalized testicles. They were surgically removed, and they realized, oh, okay, I wasn't consulted. I think I would have rather kept those testicles. I feel like I would have rather been a man with a vagina. Like, no one asked me, right? Okay. So now we have situations with, in every single one of these situations, I want to say is like there's a certain theme in my stories here. The theme is when people assume for the individual what is best for them before they're of the age to figure out that for themselves, right? Like the teacher assumed that me being right-handed was best for me before I was of the age to really determine which hand I should have been. And all these medical practices, including Dave Reamer's case, was when a psychologist or a medical practitioner assumed what was best for the patient before the patient was old enough or conscious enough or developed the metacognitive abilities to thoroughly understand themselves enough to know what their preferences were in terms of how their body is to be treated. Okay. And the term for that is individual sovereignty. So that's one of the themes of these stories, okay? So individual sovereignty is this idea that as beings, we're sovereign over our bodies. And when we decide that we at the end of the day can only decide what's best for our bodies. And that we're the ultimate authority over that. So a medical practitioner can't tell us what they think is best for our bodies. Our parents can't tell us what is best for our bodies. And so I'm someone that really honors my individual sovereignty over figuring out what is best for my body. So back to my story. When I started exploring who I really was at age 19, 20, when I started going to college, once I actually felt I had the freedom to discover what my individual sovereignty is, because I was no longer living with my dad, who forbade me from expressing in any sort of feminine way or any way of being homosexual. And he was always on me. He was always on me. He was very aware, ever since I held hands with that boy, that I might be holding hands with boys behind his back, and so he was constantly watching me. And I got to love him for it, because for him, that was what parenting was. He thought that the role of being a father was to teach his son how to be proper. And he just wanted me to be his proper son. It took me years to figure out how to forgive him for that and have that relationship with him. He's passed away now, but we're still very close. But I'll leave those stories for some other time. So when I started exploring myself and allowed myself to have relationships with people, I wanted to have, I was pretty open-minded, but what I wanted to do was figure out how to just have a compatible relationship with someone that loved me for who I was. I think we all want that. And the people that were most available for this in college were gay identifying men that were gay, and they, wanted to help me figure out who I was. And I don't know if you guys, we probably all know a gay man or two or more maybe. but they're pretty sexually promiscuous. And, so I got on the Grindr app and I learned how to connect with gay men. And I had a lot of gay sex, which was great for me at the time because I hadn't had intimacy for, 20 years of my life. And it was great to have that intimacy at first. And what I realized is that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't actually fall in love with a gay man. And so I was like, okay, cool. Well, the sex is, whatever. The intimacy is there, but the true bond, the true relationship that I'm looking for in a human is not being reciprocated to me. And I didn't know why that was going on. That was heartbreaking for me at the time. I was in my early 20s. And so I kept exploring, and and at that point, because I was raised in such a conservative upbringing with the transphobia and the homophobia of my father, I was very transphobic. I just couldn't even be present with trans people at that time. I had a hard enough accepting that I was gay, but when I realized that there's something more to me, I realized that I had to then open my mind about what else could be there for me. And so I started, what ended up happening is that I met a boy. Okay. So I met a boy. And he was a straight boy, or he's a straight identifying boy. And he just really liked me for whatever reason. He really liked me. And we happened to fall in love with each other. And that was hard, especially for him, because he had never been in love with a boy before. Because at that point I was identifying as a boy. And after a long period of our love affair, which couldn't go anywhere ultimately, because he was a straight man, I finally realized that the reason why he makes me feel so balanced in relation is because he made me feel like a woman. He treated me like a woman. Other gay men don't treat the men like other men. Gay men like other men. So they treat me like a man. They can be feminine, but gay men don't treat each other like a woman. So I was like, okay, I think one night, we were hanging out, and I just kind of had this awareness in myself, and I told him I think that I'm actually a woman. And there was a long pause, and he looks at me and he's like, that makes sense. There's no way that I could have fallen in love with a man. And so I was like, okay, well. And then, he was still looking for a more traditional woman. So we ended up working out. But that left me with a lot of open-ended questions in terms of, if I am a woman, what sort of woman am I supposed to be? And how could I be a woman with the body that I had, when everyone always told me that having a penis meant I was automatically going to be a boy. So that started my journey into understanding my gender as a woman. And what I want to say is I've never liked the term trans, because trans implies that, well, trans implies a lot of different things, but one of the things that trans often implies is that you're moving from one camp to another. You're going from male to female, or whatever. Because I felt like I always wanted to love my body as it was. So, and I can talk more about the term trans. And in terms of, if I really want to get, philosophical on y'all, I could say, the word refers to a phenomena. The word trans woman refers to a phenomena. I happen to believe that phenomena exists. I'm that phenomena. Now, whether we want to use the word trans to identify me, identify that phenomenon, that's up to the English language. That's up to the doctors in the 1960s who decided that the term trans was the most appropriate to identify people of this phenomenon. And, okay, so now the identity, what I'd rather identify myself as is a woman with a penis. Just like these intersex people, they're born with internalized gonads, they have testicles, they're men with vaginas. It's not their fault. And so now what did that mean? What does that mean to be a woman with a penis? Well, in the English language, there just really isn't language for it at all. And it left me with this very complicated position of how do I fit into my own expectations of myself and also society's expectations. And when I started when I started expanding my understanding into the trans world, and when I started going to the doctor and asking for hormones because I started taking estrogen, which felt good, then I realized that there is a huge medical push for surgical alteration. And that didn't feel good for me at the time. It still doesn't feel good for me now. And the reason why there's such a push, I don't quite, there's a lot of theories about why I don't quite understand it for myself. But when I went in and I said, okay, I think like the hormones, and I think the next thing I want is my facial hair. I think I want to do laser hair removal on my face. And they're like, yeah, sure, we can help you with that. But it took them 2 years to figure out how to find the right cosmetic specialist to offer me laser hair removal on my face. And I couldn't continue the treatments either because the one place that does it is in San Rafael, and I couldn't keep driving out there. And then when I told them that maybe I was curious to explore surgical changes to my body, they're like, okay, cool, we can have it done within 3 months. And I'm just like, whoa, how is it the case that just taking care of my hair takes 2 years for them to figure out, but yet if I want to like permanently alter my body in a way that it's a big decision for me, that's just right around the corner, right? So that didn't make sense to me. And it still doesn't make sense to me, but I also want to say that a part of me would really love to be in a relation with a man and with the man that I love, right? And have sex with the man while I'm facing the man, right? And if I had a vagina, that would be possible. And that's a very compelling fantasy for me as a trans woman or, as a woman with a penis. So maybe one day I may want to have bottom surgery and have them do that. And then I can have a relationship with a man in that unique way. But I'm also aware of other possibilities. So along this journey of discovering my sexual identity and my gender identity, I also learned that I'm a medicine person of Quechua descent from my mother's side of the family, my mother's ancestry. And I started exploring what it means to be an Indigenous person. And in that exploration, I discovered that within many Indigenous cultures, I can't generalize to all of them, there was a specific place held for people that were not gender conforming. And they had terms for them which were acknowledging of their existence, but didn't necessarily make it seem that they had to transition from one extreme to another. And so in my Indigenous culture, there is this idea of complementarity instead of a binary. And this is a crucial thing. In English, we tend to believe that sex is like hot and cold, or right and wrong, or left and right. Like we have like this polarity that we put in male and female. They're like two separate camps and they're opposites. We tend to think of them as opposites. And that's why when doctors in the 1960s wanted to figure out how to name people like me, they chose the word trans, because English has such a binary way of understanding reality. And so if someone says that they're a woman when they're supposed to be the opposite, then there must be some sort of transition that, that has to happen. And so, I mean, I guess that made sense to them at the time, in terms of trying to figure out how to name things. But in Quechua, there isn't a sense of a binary. In Quechua, there's complementarity. And so what that means is one always goes along with the other. Just like your left hand and your right hand, they're not opposites. They complement each other. They can work together. And so Kari is the term for the divine masculine energy, and Warmi is a term for the divine feminine energy. And people, when they come into sacred union with each other, they form a complementary balance called Kari Warmi. And everyone is trying to achieve Kari Warmi. So the focus in Quechua culture is less on how you identify as either Kari or Warmi, but rather that you want to achieve Kari Warmi. And if you are Kari, then you're going to want to call in a Warmi. And if you're Warmi, you want to call in a Kari. But they also recognize that some individuals were already Kari Warmi within themselves. And so now they found a different way of achieving that complementarity, and they would be called Kari Warmi, or Warmi Kari. And they were given specific roles in society and in Quechua culture to help bridge different functions, because they could hold space in different ways. So when I learned that, I felt really at home with that, because I realized that I was always Kari Warmi from the moment I was born. And I didn't have to transition out of being a boy to being a girl. I had a very different, distinct spiritual journey in a body. The partner that I'm supposed to have will balance me out. They'll have a Kari Warmi balance in return. And I have yet to find that person. But the more I understand myself, the more likely I will find my Kari Warmi. Okay, so now looping back around, if I didn't have this ancestral heritage to connect to, I would have been stuck with the wisdom of the medical industry to help me figure out how to navigate my gender dysphoria. And that wisdom is, because it's a very European-centered
2-3 more minutes.
great dynamic, is that, well, there can only exist two different things, either a man or a woman, and therefore you have to be one or the other. And men look like this, and women look like that, and if you want to be a woman, you have to look like that, which means we have all these state-of-the-art surgical operations to help you get there. And that is the solution from their perspective. And that's what it means to be a trans person, oftentimes. It's this idea of having to journey through this medical process. And so my story, I want to say, is that there's a different way of having a gender journey for a trans person, because I identify myself as a trans person because that's just the term that, English decided to use. Because it's easier to say that than a woman with a penis, but, but every single person has their own gender story. And I really, really value listening to the gender stories of detransitioners in particular, because I feel like they weren't allowed to explore the fullness of their gender story because they were pushed into a medicalization solution before before it was right for them. And I also want to close by saying that there's many people in that finding that the medical transition process is right for them. And and for them, I'm really happy for that. And it may end up being right for me in the future when I am old enough to really determine whether that is what I want to do. And so I'll end with that.
Thank you so much, Alana. Oh, can you, okay. Alana, thank you for sharing your personal stories. That was very brave to do that in public. Thank you so much. So at this time, we would like to open up the event for question and answer. If anybody has any questions for the panelists, please come up. We'll give you the mic, and we will give each side a chance to answer the question. We ask that your question be brief, and we will give the answers 2 to 3 minutes. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists? Lana? This is kind of
Hokey.
yeah. So
Layla, this is for you. How do your parents react now to your detransition and your battles that you have now? So I am assuming that they were supportive to help medicalize you. How do they feel now?
yeah.
Yeah, so, my doctors kind of gaslit. Ooh. Should I move closer?
I think the cord needs to go in a specific way because it's starting to fray inside, I think. So you just need to like, yeah, I know.
There we go.
Thank you. So my parents were lied to, deceived, given the dilemma of dead daughter, live son. They were naturally very supportive when you put it in that way, and they thought it was life-saving care at the time. Coming up now, they're utterly devastated that they fell for this and that they have to see me live with the effects. Hindsight is always 20/20. So hopefully that kind of answers.
Yes, thank you. Does anyone else have a question? No? We can form a line right here if you'd like to come up so we can keep it moving.
Hi, this is for Ari. First, I want to say how much I enjoyed everyone's stories and very moving. So Ari, I think you mentioned when you were working at the LGBT center, there were some older men, mainly autogynephile men, kind of, I guess the right word is grooming. I don't know. I was just wondering if you feel comfortable, you could share more about, were they coming on to you, or they were just getting a kick out of trying to feminize a young man? And also, I'm sorry, I'm so incoherent. I've always gotten the impression that autogynephilic men, for the most part, are attracted to females. And so, I don't know, any way you want to answer. Thank you.
So, let's see. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was homeless. I really needed support. I didn't have any familial support in my life, and I was offered a support group. And you'd go in every other week, and there'd be 15, maybe 20 people who all identified as trans women in this support group. And this was almost 20 years ago. So this was before the big wave of young people being medicalized. I think The closest person to me in age was 10 years older than me. He was about 27 and balding. He had severe autoandrophobia, so he was constantly torturing himself over looking like a man. He provided me DIY resources, so that's actually how I started medicalizing. The next closest person was about 20 years older than me. These guys would sit there in a floral dress, looking very much like old middle-aged men in floral dresses, and they talk about their gender fifis. And they talk about how conflicted they felt and how they wished they had done this when they were teenagers and how, well, they didn't regret their military service, but God, it didn't help make them into real men. And I didn't know like the differences between heterosexual and homosexual transitioners. I now have read back through Hirschfeld, and I know that there's been two types for males since the beginning, 100 years. We've always split the males who were homosexual from heterosexual. It's hard for me to speculate on the motivations of those men. I think a lot of them were probably lifelong cross-dressers, who came out and decided to medicalize after probably 10, 20 years of cross-dressing and adopted the framework of transgenderism and transsexualism in order to define themselves. I don't necessarily think all of them were malicious, but I do think that autogynephiles have a propensity for pink pilling, for wanting to see a young man castrate himself, feminize himself. I think there is a paraphilic motivation for some men to encourage young men to castrate ourselves. I think a lot of men who have elements of pederasty are attracted to young men who have been feminized or castrated when we were teenagers. It's something that I experienced, being the victim of a pederast as a castrated young man. And being his beard, his legal outlet for his pedophilia because my body had been feminized. These are things that are very real for me that I didn't really have a framework for conceptualizing until I started asking these questions about what trans really was and removed myself from what I had been taught. And I just wanted to add, after hearing Alana speak, I made all of my life's decisions under this framework that the only solution was to castrate myself, was to medicalize myself, that to do anything else, I would inevitably kill myself. So there's a level of manipulation that occurs when you give someone a framework of suicide or transition. And if they believe it, it feels hopeless, like you have no other options but to keep walking down that path. And eventually, you're stuck in the sunk cost fallacy era. You've gone too far. You can't go back. What do? You have nothing more than to keep going and hope, well, one more surgery, one more operation, and then it'll feel better because that's the framework you've been operating under. And what are you going to do? Just stop now? So you go and you remove your genitals, you remove body parts, you flay yourself, you surgically modify yourself, and nothing makes it better because that wasn't the problem.
Thank you.
Hello.
There you go.
Hello. My name's Michael. First of all, let me just say before I ask a question that I have been a social worker and a school counselor for 45 years. I'm retired, but I'm still working in the schools. And it just blows my mind that the norm within the setting that I've worked in the different schools has to do with something we don't allow adolescents or even younger adolescents, middle school age kids or whatever, we don't allow them to do for so many other things. That is give their informed consent. They can't get an aspirin, they can't do a lot of things. They can't consent on their own to a lot of things. And yet informed consent regarding this matter seems to be something that is being pushed, advocated, or whatever, that yes, in this case, it's not only possible, it's true, it's real. So which I find to be absolutely ridiculous, because in a helping profession, whether it's medical or psychosocial or whatever, the standard of care that we've all been told must begin at this point is first, do no harm. You have to begin there. And in doing that, you have to search and delve into so many issues before you might even come up with what is the plan of action here. So the question, I guess, is to Layla. Were you, when you were in middle school or going into high school, was there anyone who refused to affirm what you were going through, or tell you that, wait a minute, slow down here, this is, or did everybody just grab you and put their arms around you and say, this is, congratulations, you got, you know, you've got a lot of courage for this. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So honestly, like I grew up kind of relative to this area, right? And everybody was affirming except for like a couple of kids, but
The adults mainly.
yeah, no, the adults were all affirming. You know, my school records were changed over to my male name with not really any hesitation or pause or any difficulty, honestly. So.
But were you overwhelmed by any of that, or was it like, okay, I'm okay with this right now? Everybody is helping me with this, and they're making these decisions. Did they kind of go overboard with some of this?
I don't know if I would say that they necessarily went overboard per se, but it definitely was overwhelming, constantly being told, oh, you're stunning, you're brave. And I'm just like, I'm just trying to, because that was my framework, was that I have a medical condition that I'm medicalizing and treating myself for, which I did not have apparently. So it kind of felt like just a lot of hug boxing.
Yeah, I see a lot of kids every day when I go in the high schools that I work at. So many of them are confused, and so many of them have no real understanding yet of how to work through some of this stuff. And they're being told over by so many people, you know, no, this is good. You're just, it's okay. You know, everything is fine. Just, you know, and how an adult can think that about a kid, you know, I don't understand how, and the worst of all are the doctors. The very people that are there to do no harm have universally affirmed. I don't understand it, and I just
Yeah,
curious.
a lot of stuff. Thank you so much for your questions. We have another question.
Hi, I want to thank all of you for your bravery in coming here, and for your stories. I really appreciate stories, because I do think that that's how we can all start to really understand each other. I don't believe in the binary, because I believe in all the different shades, because there's so many different angles and ways of looking at things. I also work in the schools. I'm a high school, public school teacher. I'm a Spanish teacher. I think a lot about colonialism. And when I was a young woman in Oklahoma, you know, my first community relationship was with a Kiowa Nation man. I was also very connected with a lot of First Nations people, including one of my roommates for probably 1989 or 1990. Famous drag queen Two-Spirit out here right now, but back in Oklahoma, you know, he was 19, and he Chickasha, he was Chickasha, one of the remaining like 44 Chickasha speakers, and he told me about the Chickasha culture and having this other way to be, and he said we call it the leaf woman, which later, many years later, I learned about the Two-Spirit word that people came up with, but he said in our own culture we called them the leaf woman. It was often a man with feminine characteristics. They might have a special role. Now in Oklahoma, in all of the different Native communities, there was a huge force of Christianity that he believed really was harming people like him. he was at the age where he was coming out as a gay man. And a lot of people at that time were coming out and recognizing themselves because they were a freshman and sophomore in college. And it took a lot because they were not only fighting who they were in, this culture in Oklahoma, as Native Americans who had escaped a lot of bloodshed and Indian boarding schools and so forth. They were also dealing with a lot of homophobia in their own Native communities, which once upon a time, many years before, might not have held that homophobia, might have had more Indigenous ways of seeing different sexualities and gender presentations. And so he made it his life's work to work through the First Nation communities and change that narrative so that there would be place for Native kids like him to be gay, to be lesbian, to be bisexual, to be homosexual. Today, I see in my youth so much of a push and a social contagion on TikTok in the curriculum that we're non-binary in a binary way, that we must medicalize. My own son believed that he needed to medicalize when he was going through his own explorations. They see the drug, and I really see this as a new form of colonialization that's not only going to hurt, that's hurting Native kids. I know that it's particularly bad on female Native Americans that are in foster care. They're like one of the highest groups in Canada that seek medical transition, likely because they have been sexually abused and seek escape from their bodies. And I look at this as this huge problem now of a new form of colonialization that's coming from the West once again and being farmed out across the world to transform these different cultures that may have ways of understanding their gender nonconforming children or ways of acknowledging and including their gay humans and their tribes and their groups. And now they're all going to believe that they need to be medicalized using Western medicine. I guess my question is mostly for you, Alana. How do you think about that? I see this as a new form of Western colonialization on Indigenous cultures worldwide.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. A big part of my journey has been to decolonize myself in terms of my own worldview, and in order to actually accept and appreciate my Indigenous heritage. I see colonization as generally an authoritarian construct which tells people what they need to believe or do for themselves from the top down. And so it could be, and it could be anything, but basically colonization is the disruption of individual sovereignty. And so whether it's your cultural heritage or your gender identity, or just it's the pressure to not believe in your own ability to self-determine, either self-determine who you are in terms of your gender or the language you speak, in order to submit to a higher authority, a governmental authority. And so that's what colonization looks like to me. And so I think colonization is at play here. I think the medical industry itself has been, it's part of a colonial society ancestrally, and it still operates that way, where if it believes it knows what is best for its population that it's serving, it will force itself on that population through diagnosis, through whatever. But what it's really doing is it's just employing this "I know better than you" mindset, which is what all colonizers have always felt when they came in, to push their worldviews on the people that they colonize. And maybe we're experiencing that internally now, where the colonial systems of our ancestors are now being applied to the descendants of those that were we used to be colonizers, we're recolonizing ourselves in a sense.
Just wanted to add something onto there. Funny, we're going to agree on something here. The process of medicalization was invented in fascist Europe as a way of medicalizing non-conforming gays and people who do not line up with stereotypical heterosexual standards so we could exist in fascist Europe, where being gay meant a death sentence or being locked in a mental institution. And Magnus Hirschfeld and Havelock Ellis thought of this as a way of medicalizing us into heteronormity. And it's funny because the trans community constantly talks about the risk of suicide. And if you actually look at the Aliyah or the Elksa or various different third categories in Indigenous culture, one thing you don't see them doing is killing themselves if they don't get to cut off body parts. That's a thing of Western medicine.
I have a question actually for Alana. You mentioned personal sovereignty and also that children have personal sovereignty themselves. I'm curious if you are for or against gatekeeping for hormones and surgeries, and if so, what type of gatekeeping would you be in favor of? And do you think that children should go down that pathway, first of social transition and then medicalization? And with adults, should there be more of a gatekeeping process so that we have less detransitioners?
Yeah, I thought. This mic is.
The mic is calling us.
Okay, yeah, so,
Move closer.
this. This,
Ignore the surface outside, Alana.
so this conversation is, I think,
Close the door, please. Can we have the door closed, please? Close the door, please.
Guys, if you want to go out there, go out there, but. Either stay in or go out.
Can we have the door closed, please?
We're not here. Unlike some people.
Thank you for closing the door. Appreciate it.
Was it too soon?
After you can engage, but right now we're having a civil conversation.
thank you. Yeah, so this is a very complex question for me, because as a healer, I also work with a lot of people that are youth that started using drugs really early. And being on a drug journey is a similar way of discovering who you are. And sometimes people that start smoking weed at like 12, 13, whatever, they have permanent problems when they're in their 20s and 30s because they didn't develop their emotional capacities well enough. And so I think this is part of a bigger question in terms of what it means to develop personal sovereignty. I think it is a developmental process. It took me, and I'm still like discovering myself. I think it's a lifelong process. I know personally if at 12 or 13, if I was asked if I wanted to surgically alter my body, I wouldn't have been prepared to really answer that question. I'm still not prepared to answer it now at 35. So I guess I don't really have a straightforward answer. I don't believe it's safe to assume that 12, 13-year-olds know what's best to do with their bodies. However, I also believe that they are aware enough at some point to start just knowing that there's something different going on for them, that there's something there for them to explore, and whether that's pronouns or fashion or different ways of allowing them to do that. I think there's room for exploration that's safe. And so I want to discover what that is for them. And I guess I'll leave that at that. There's such safe ways of discovery that need to be established, because I feel like that's where the medical industry can really take advantage of youth that don't feel like there's a safe way for them to really know who they are, and then they're told that this is their ticket out of their suffering. So I think that definitely could be a problem.
So I'm gathering from your answer that you are in favor of gatekeeping, more time.
Definitely in favor of more time, but that's based on my personal experience. There are other folks that have transitioned early and their stories are a little different. So I can't, for myself, I think that would have been best for me. But I can't necessarily know what's best for everyone.
Thank you for your answer. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, sorry. This is actually for everybody, but it was triggered by something Alana said. You said that you had had some unhappy relationships, or they were happy to some degree, but they weren't completely fulfilling. And then you found a man who treated you like a woman. So for you, that might feel like a spiritual thing because he was connecting to your spiritual belief about yourself. Does that make sense? That's sort of how I interpret by everything that you said. But for a lot of other people, that would simply be a someone who was treating you in a stereotypical female manner, or treating you as in a stereotypical way, if we're not going to look at it from a spiritual point of view. And I'm wondering for you and for everybody else, how much not feeling comfortable with sex stereotypes or not aligning with sex stereotypes, maybe would be the better way to put it, that you felt pressured to conform to. How much or how little that affected you, and at what point in your journey it was important, or not? Does that make sense?
I'm not entirely sure if I understand the question. Something about conforming to sex stereotypes. And so there is a, okay, let me see if I can understand your question.
I can ask it again. I can say it again.
Yeah, say it
It was a little long. Yeah, so I'm basically just, so for you, it was being treated like a woman. I would call that being treated stereotypically like a woman. It's a sex stereotype that women should be treated a different way in a relationship than a man. So how much of that fed into your idea that you are who you are, as opposed to just being a gay man, for example, not just, but being a same-sex attracted man, that gave you the idea that you were trans instead? Or I know you don't like the word trans, I completely agree with you, but how you interpret yourself, and does that make sense for everybody else?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so I think a lot of a notion that I have also that I have to fight with a lot in Western culture is this idea of your identity being something that is held solely onto yourself. And from an Indigenous perspective, knowing is always in relation to something else. And so I can only feel like I can learn who I am in relation to the people that I fall in love with. And ultimately, how they want to experience me and how we want to experience that relationship is what I end up discovering for myself. And so as soon as I started identifying as a trans woman or as a woman with a penis, I started attracting men that wanted to love me for that, and that love feels more authentic and real. And also, gay men aren't attracted to me. So when I go to a gay club, for example, they're not hitting on me. They're not trying to be in a relationship with me. They know the difference between a woman with a penis and another gay man.
Can I get a time check?
Oh, we've got 20 minutes, so maybe if the other people want to answer that.
Does anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I guess in relation to being treated like a woman, when I was 17, this was applicable in the sense like, I was a weird kid. I was walking around with romance novels in middle school, had a little sachet in my walk. I was quiet, a little shy. And like, I used to crack this joke that the last time I got punched in my face for being a sassy faggot was 15 years ago when I started injecting estrogen and wearing dresses. Um, and that's a reality. I got to opt out of being a gay man. I got to opt out of all of the shitty men who treat effeminate gay men like absolute dog shit. I got to opt out of being punched in the face for being sassy. I got to opt out of being 5'5" and scrawny. Men started getting the doors for me. Men stopped hitting me in the face. Like, I got to wear all the pretty things and nobody criticized me for it. And from that, doctors took a look at the happiness that I had, because this was 20 years ago. Back then, they didn't just give you like a 1 hour therapy session. Oh, you're dysphoric. No, back then it was a year. It was psychologists, it was therapists, it was cross-dressing, to be quite frank, like lived experience, presenting that way. And so when I was 17, I went from a family where I didn't get to pick out my own clothes. I was wearing suits as a kid, like think Mormon, but Roman Catholic. And I went from that to the doctors being like, well, you can do whatever you want. You want to go get your nails done? You want to wear those booty shorts you've been hiding from your mom? Go ahead. Like, you're a girl now. Try to live like a girl. And of course, there was a lot of positives to that. I didn't get punched in the face anymore. Men opened the door for me and I got to wear whatever the fuck I want. Excuse my language. So being treated like a woman for me as a teenager was getting to opt out of the oppression of being a gay man.
But don't you think that's sad?
Oh, it's really sad. That's why it's anti-gay eugenics.
That's what
Transition is anti-gay eugenics. That was the mindset it was thought of in the 1900s and 1990s.
Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Lila. I actually already know Ari. And I have a question for the detransitioners on the panel. Because I, a detransitioner myself, feel that the medical industry and insurance companies really push medicalization instead of therapy or trying to figure out any other underlying medical or mental health condition that there may be in the individual and especially in children. So I want to know if you guys have similar thoughts on that type of stuff, whether you're detrans or not.
Yeah, I feel like it was really not that accessible to get consistent enough therapy, especially on a basis that I needed with Kaiser, especially towards the years close to my detransition. But even before that, back when they're having the mental health care shortages and employees and workers, you know, I really do believe that they just really push for medicalization as an easy fix. You know, it's profitable for them. But, you know, one issue, and I meant to touch on this earlier, but with this whole form of healthcare is that it's experimental. They don't know what they're doing to an extent. It's kind of just winging it. You know, even now, when I seek detransition related care, a lot of doctors shrug. You know, if I go to the ER, they ask me for my past medical history, medicine use in the past. And I honestly tell them testosterone. They don't know what questions to ask me. They're just at a loss. You know, they don't want to get canceled and ask, but they also are not, you know, doing a quality job and properly assessing certain aspects of my health as needed. You know, not to ramble on, but I even went to a fertility specialist and I had almost 2 months worth of blood draws and I still couldn't get a definite yes or no that I'm infertile. So sorry to kind of deviate. So yeah, I wanted to add that, you know, I'm an epileptic. I started having very severe seizures around 19 years old. I always had micro seizures in my sleep, but a couple years into transition, I started having grand mals.
I was disabled for about a decade because of that. And because I had such terrible seizures, I couldn't take the ultimate treatment, the end to the path, the removal of the genitals, the surgeries. I couldn't have them. So at 25 years old, I had a cascade of intervention because spironolactone was causing liver damage. And they gave me the choice of detransition or have some kind of bottom surgery, but I couldn't have bottom surgery. So I had a black market orchiectomy. Fast forward a couple years, and I moved all the way across the country. I used the cannabis industry on the West Coast to put my seizures into remission, went back to school, got off disability, got a job, and I thought, I need to get some therapy. And I was in EMDR therapy for the childhood sexual assault. My therapist discontinued my therapy after 6 months and told me it was destabilizing my identity as a trans woman and to focus on my happiness as a trans woman. And then the trans-identified female who had been giving me therapy for years wrote me a letter for sexual reassignment surgery. So yeah, no, they don't really care about treating the why. They just care about profiteering off of surgeries that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Block anybody. On a live stream, I think we were both at Kaiser Oakland, right? Yeah, yes. Layla and I were at the same gender people. I was, I think, a few years before you. I was in like 2010-ish.
Yeah.
I think you were like,
Pediatric clinic.
yeah. So I was a young adult. You were pediatric. So it wasn't quite the same, but it was the same like hospital and culture. And yeah, they really, for me, they didn't put me in any kind of therapy. And in fact, they didn't really have therapy as an option. You could try to get on a wait list. You might get one session like every other week for a few weeks. And then they would often discharge you. So there was no real like look into my history and why I wanted to do this so much. And what was driving my intense negative moods that I felt I had, which looking back, I actually don't think I was that moody before they put me on the drugs. I really wasn't. I didn't have panic disorder diagnosis until they put me on the combination of hormones. And I also Ari started having seizures on hormones. And I did have a family history of that, so it wasn't entirely due to that, but these hormones all do change seizure thresholds. And so if you have a subclinical seizure disorder and you go on these drugs, it can absolutely bring it out. And they will not necessarily connect the dots, even though they're very obvious. They'll tell you that, oh, it must be because of your childhood trauma that we never addressed before we put you on these drugs. That's what's causing the seizures. Through the magic of the psychology gremlin, they can also do things somehow, be the uncaused cause, be the prime mover in your mind and make your body move with no cause of its own. No, it's you put me on a drug that changed the seizure threshold, and therefore I was over the seizure threshold more often. And so I too am in remission now, thankfully. But that did destroy my life for a few years. And I don't talk too much about it because I'm still dealing with the emotional trauma of that whole time. That was very, very distressing to try to get them to see it as a physical thing. And they just wouldn't. They'll keep adding diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis, but they will never question the fact that they put you on a drug that's directly suppressing your brain. And it's because they know that the other problems that it will create are profitable and they can keep selling you more stuff. So unfortunately, there's a perverse incentive in modern medicine to not fix things, to not diagnose things, to not treat things, and to gaslight patients so that they are desperate by the time they're in your office so that they sign the lie faster.
We have a few more minutes. Question?
It's a bit of a question, a little bit of a comment with the forum. I really, really appreciate your guys' stories as well. I have been feeling like I've been on the front lines in the Bay Area with a friend of mine, and I just want to know if you guys are aware, I'm sure you're hearing stories of children being forced transition earlier and earlier. My friend's child was being forced transition by the mother. And since then, because of that situation, I've been hearing this more and more at the age of 2 and 3. And in order to document, it was causing a rift. The child was taken to a transgender clinic in the Bay Area with symptoms of incontinence and some other PTSD symptoms. And because they were at a gender clinic, instead of having objective view of the child and potentially looking into some abuse that, the psychological abuse that was going on at home and being mandated reporters, because I say, if you go to a surgeon, they're gonna wanna do surgery. If you go to a gender clinic, they're gonna wanna transgender a child. And so this mother was getting it in the medical record and then took the child to a transgender therapist who one of you mentioned in the first hour, was diagnosing the child. And so since then, other stories, other people that we've met that have had the same issue with their children coming forward. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any comments on perhaps any black and white laws that you feel strongly about that should be put in place to protect these children. This daycare was complicit, CPS was complicit, communicare licensing has been complicit. I could go on, and it's been really, I was an adoptive foster mother here in Yolo County, and I have seen the changes go on. I was told recently by a fellow foster mom that they give children as young as 7 and tell them not to tell them what they're, don't force anything, which I'm all for hearing their stories and helping them explore themselves and get to know themselves. But just wondering if you guys have any hard and fast rules that you think would, based on your experiences.
I'm going to paraphrase. Is your question to the panel, are they for gatekeeping, more gatekeeping on children?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm all for gatekeeping children. I believe that they should, instead of seeing a gender therapist, get qualitative mental health care, full diagnostic panel ran up. I had a lot of signs of trauma that were missed even by that would be caught by my general practitioner, such as really frequent UTIs, which is a signifier of childhood sexual assault. So even things like that can't be missed. But yeah, no, for sure, no hormone surgeries at least until 18, 19 at the bare minimum.
I'm for shutting down transition like the southern border. I want to ban it for children and for adults. I think the medical system should have a proof this is even remotely necessary. I don't believe in hacking hardware to solve a software problem. This is unethical until the day that they can prove that it's necessary and they can accurately diagnose whichever demographic it's necessary for. It should just be shut down while we figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that the stories of detransitioners are extremely important at this time, especially because they give us awareness to the broader impact of these situations. And so that's why I'm here and I want to support this sort of work because it provides a bigger picture of what the true impact can be. And I also want to invite the stories of transitioners that have found happiness in these processes and figure out what the difference is because those stories are also real and they're also happy for who they are. So that's what I'd like to say.
To answer your question, I mean, in general, yes, doctors are there to gatekeep. That's the point of that's why we don't let people just buy whatever over the counter and self-medicate. But in terms of the strict policy changes, strict laws, I think that binding arbitration should be absolutely illegal in medical context, especially for children. They sold her rights. They sold her rights.
Yeah.
As a child, they shouldn't be allowed to do that because then what is the incentive to not screw up? There should be no limits on what juries can award people for this kind of medical harm. We have to get rid of that. We need actual tort reform to get rid of it. And I'm also thinking that we need to get rid of some of the untimed codes because that gives doctors an incentive to get you out as fast as possible. And then that's why they're not doing the real assessments.
Thank you.
We have a few more minutes.
Hi, my name is Dorota Jensen. I had a question for all of you, and it's kind of a big topic, so I don't know, maybe you can come back again. I do have a page back there on the table. It says, for people to fill out if they like, it says comments for this event, and then on the other side, ideas for future events. So interesting, all of you, if you ever wanted to come back and talk more, but this was a big topic, I think. What about the social aspect? When you were starting to get into your journey of medicalization or learning about yourself, what kind of friends did you have? And then as you took a different road, did you lose those friends or did you get new friends? Or certainly about your family as well, if you had a family? Because it seems like most people need support, and I just wonder, did anybody disown you along the way, or, I mean, it's just, I was wondering, and it's such a big topic, but I do hear that once you detrans, then you get thrown out of the trans community, or I just wondered, any thoughts about that?
I will say I did not get disowned when I came out as trans, although it did strain some extended family relationships. Likewise, so to detransition, actually, it put kind of the same strain on it all over again. I don't believe social transition is a neutral act. It's just one step on the way towards solidifying the feeling that they need to medicalize. So.
By the time my mother found out that I was transitioning, I was already several years into transition. She told me that I felt this way because of what he did to me. I told her, no, Mom, you're wrong. The doctors promised me that wasn't possible. She said, why can't you just be a gay man? And I said, because I'm a straight woman. And we didn't talk for a decade. When I came out as having regret, I started asking questions. I was canceled and doxxed by Antifa and lost all of my friends. So I've been ostracized on both sides. I lost my family when I transitioned, and then I lost the cult when I detransitioned. And I just wanted to add something that I think I might have left out. I didn't have gender dysphoria when I walked into the LGBT center, but I had it when I left. I had body dysmorphic disorder around my genitals. But because I was taught that I was a woman in a man's body, I started obsessing over my appearance with that finicky gay brain that needed every curl to be perfect, and I left with gender dysphoria. I don't have it now because I accepted myself as a man. Cross-sex ideation can be taught, and cross-sex ideation causes gender dysphoria. They are making patients by teaching them this.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I feel like that's a very important question to ask, because the people that you're surrounded by definitely have a big impact on your worldview. And in my experience, all of the people in my life have helped me get to where I am, even the ones that didn't want to support me or love me. Because they had certain ideas of who I should be. And because in pushing back against them, I also discovered who I was through that. However, I also feel like there's a big power play at play when you're dealing with industries like the education system or the medical industry. Those relationships aren't the same as family and friend relationships or community relationships, because they have authority to medicalize you, or to diagnose to you, to tell you, what they think is in your best interest somehow. And they can even, if you are suicidal or you're feeling like you're going to harm yourself, they have authority to send you to a mental institute. That's a very different relationship when there's a power dynamic like that. And then I feel like that's a big piece of what has been brought up today, is how we relate to these systems of authority when they tell us that we need to do something, and we may not know how to evaluate that for ourselves.
So in my case, I had gender issues, like, even when I was a young child, I would have a lot of anxious preoccupation about whether people would see me as a girl or see me as a boy, or were judging me as a girl, or would think I was less than a boy in some way. I mean, I had a lot of anxieties growing up. But then when I came out as trans, my family kind of, I mean, my mom didn't want me to continue and do anything else. She's like, it's okay to do this sometimes, but like, don't like make a pursuit of it. And so I just did it without telling her that I was doing the hormones and stuff and continuing. And so she was aware of like that. And otherwise, I don't know exactly how much my extended family thought about it. I never got like told I shouldn't do it by anyone else. And it was actually only when I started having really deteriorating mental health about, at that point, it was about 7 years on the hormones, like 3 years on the combo hormone, where they had the two progestins at the same time. And I had started developing other problems, and then that led to even more medication, that led to more problems and more medication. And it was a really vicious cycle. And so at one point during that, I actually just felt like I needed to completely withdraw socially. And so I kind of stopped talking to my family for a little while, and just really withdrew and tried to cope with a lot. And then coming out of it has really helped me see the value of strong family relationships. And so I've been able to reconnect with them and repair to the extent possible. And so I do have a very, very strong relationship with them now, despite the fact that the difficulties of my childhood did contribute to all this. And so I do think forgiveness and moving forward is possible, but it does, when you come out, and then when you change your mind and have to be like, yeah, just kidding, you guys. I guess I am a flawed human who's infallible after all, who knew? Is hard, and it's a waste of time is the unfortunate part. So we're at the end of the event. We're going to give all of the panel 1 minute for their closing remarks, and then we will be closing this space. Thank you again for showing up and supporting everybody who came to speak today. I think they're very brave. Layla.
Yeah, so in closing, I'd like to say, there's no wrong way to be a boy or wrong way to be a girl. Let boys be feminine, let girls be masculine, and we should not be medicalizing children because of that. Because what happens is you end up with more people like me, more detransitioners that, a lot of people, especially the ones out there, are really tiresome of seeing. So stop medicalizing children if you want to see less of people like me.
We love you, Layla.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, so in closing, I guess I'd like to say that trans is anti-gay eugenics. It was invented in the early 1900s by intellectuals who saw homosexuality as sexual inversion. Their viewpoint on being gay was fundamentally homophobic. They thought that effeminate gay men had elements in us that were womanly, and that masculine lesbians had elements in them that just were closer to men, and that the only way for us to exist in fascist Europe was to medicalize our body into heteronormative life. So what we have today is an anti-gay eugenics program that's been latched onto by autogynephiles who have spun out an ideology around gender in order to perpetuate their lies. And they have seized the medical system, they've seized academia, and they're pushing the castration of kids under the guise of gender, when in actuality it's all just paraphilia and mental illness.
Right on.
I'd like to say how grateful I am to be here, and how much I've enjoyed this this panel, this conversation. I think more of it needs to be had. I have an immense amount of questions for people that have diverse experiences from mine, and I am here to honor the diversity as much as possible. I don't think a one-size-fits-all solution is possible, and I think people really need to dig deep into themselves to really discover what their truth is, and that's not something that necessarily the medical industry can do for you. And so I think the gender journey is a deeply personal transformation that everyone has to go through. I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with anyone. Nothing to be medicalized or gender dysphoria is not a disease, it's not necessarily a problem. It's not something that needs to be corrected, but it does need to be held and explored and figured out in other ways.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciated being able to speak today. And so I guess my last closing thought is just that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And so if you're being offered a free lunch, you have to understand that you're going to be paying for it some way or another. And so if you don't have to quote Jess Ting, who personally helped to castrate Jazz Jennings as a minor and did one of his revisions, as I recall, he said, if you don't have to cut that, why would you cut that? During the surgery when they were debating about whether to keep cutting Jess. And I just think that that's such a powerful statement, and I wish that they would apply that to the rest of their life, because you don't need to cut someone just because they have gender distress. I would like to thank everybody who came out today. I'd like to thank Beth Bourne. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Moms for Liberty for sponsoring this event. Let's give it up. I'd like to thank Women Are Real. I would like to thank Cause. Evidence-based law policy. And I would also like to thank Democrats for an informed approach to gender. I'd also like to thank everybody out there that decided to watch live. Thank you so much for supporting this event. There will be more. And let's all give it up one at a time for our amazing panel. Thank you so much, Layla. Thank you so much, Ari. Thank you, Alana, for showing up. And thank you, Exulansic. Amazing panel, amazing event. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Judy. Thanks to these. Thank you. See you next time.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I'm not sure how you did.
So I think I was like,
They like 16. So, Mike, can I turn this off?